session is a little bit different to a usual office hours in that we're going to talk about a theme. And the theme that we chose to talk about this time is workflow rules and process builder, which is part of what Salesforce calls process automation. And I know that we have this great panel, all of whom I know absolutely love building both workflow rules and process builder. And over the next hour, I hope they'll convince you that, first of all, these are great skills for you all to have, and that actually it can be really quite straightforward and also very powerful. So you've probably, I thought we might actually start with workflow rules. There are several different kinds of what Salesforce calls automation, and I know Process Builder is the fun one. But I think we might start with workflow rules just because they've been around for longer. They're a little more straightforward. And I don't know whether the three of you would agree with me, but it feels like they're a good starting step. So if you can learn how to build a workflow rule, then sort of diving into process probably feels easier or a bit more familiar if you start with a workflow rule. But obviously there are limitations, and Process Builder is going to help you to do more. However, kind of workflow rules are this sort of backbone. So there are a few things that you can do with them. And I wonder, Michael, you had a great example of a particular type of workflow rule. And I wonder if we could swap screens, if you wouldn't mind just sort of talking through what your workflow rule is, and kind of by way of doing that, just kind of explain to anyone who's on the call who's never done this before, just what you might need to do and think about as you build a workflow rule. Would that be okay?
Sure.
Yeah. And I will swap over to you, and then yes, you will be able to see something on the screen, Kathy. And I forgot to show the slide, but I will come back to it. So here we go.
Okay. So can you see my nonprofit starter pack screen?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Can you hear me okay? Okay. So workflow rule is, as Caroline said, a really good place to start when you're thinking about automation. I would agree that it's probably the most straightforward. It's certainly been around the longest. And because of those things, there's a lot more resources about it right now, although Process Builder is certainly coming up strong on the backstretch. So how do you think about workflow rule? How do you kind of get started? Well, the first thing I like to talk about is that there's really three components to the workflow. Well, not three. There's certainly two. There's the rule, which is the criteria for which whatever you want to have happen will happen, and then there's the action, or which is what you want to have happen, and that can be one or more than one action. So the example I have is very simple, and it's simply one of the simplest actions you can have is that when something happens, assign someone a task to either review something that happened or do something or whatever. So that's what this workflow is, and it's the way I go to my workflow. First of all, is I'm in setup, as you can see, and I'm a big fan of searching over here, but you can also just use the tree and go down to the create menu, and then you'll find workflow and approvals here, and here are workflow rules. And so you can see in this trial org of nonprofit starter pack, we have several. Just as a quick little aside, this little icon here means this is the managed workflow, so you can't do very many changes to this. But here's the one that I have, and it's already created, so hopefully that won't cause too much confusion in that I'm not starting from scratch. You can certainly do that, but I thought it'd be easier since it's already here to just take a look at it. And so as you can see, there's the rule, and I'll click into edit on this so you can see how this works. When you're creating a workflow rule, you have a few choices about it that you need to consider first of all, and that's when do you want to evaluate when this record is, when do you want to evaluate the rule? Do you want to evaluate it when the record is created? Do you want to evaluate it when it's created and every time it's edited? And there's a note here that you can't do time-dependent workflow actions with this, and we'll come back to that, I think, later. But the third option is created and anytime it's edited to subsequently meet the criteria. And holy cats, there's this awesome little info here to tell you what that means. And so in this case, I'm going to have it run every time it's created and every time it's edited. One thing I forgot to talk about, let me back up for a second. I'm actually going to start with a new workflow rule just for a second, because the first thing that you have to consider before anything else is what object is your workflow rule running on. And that's important because the object that it's running on is the place where a record needs to be edited in order for anything to happen. And so in this case, my workflow rule is on the contact object. And I believe we can see that on the screen. Yes, we can. So that means every time a contact record is created or edited, it's going to be evaluated for this rule. And I'll talk through this rule now. I always want to put a description in there so that if someone else comes in here later or I leave this organization, they can have a sense of what this thing is doing. And in this case, my workflow rule is a little bit using some formula stuff. You don't have to do this. You can do just straight criteria, but you don't get as many options. And so I'm a big fan of the formula just because I can do some more things. And one of the things I can do here is with a formula, I can use this isChange function. And if I don't know about functions or I'm not familiar with them, the nice thing is you've got a little list of them over here on the right, and you can sort of sort, or you can just scroll in here. And where it gets even more interesting and cool is that as you click on one, it tells you a little bit about it and how it works. So here I can tell that it's saying, this is the syntax for it. So isChanged, open parenthesis, your field name. And then it tells you this function checks if the field's value is different from its prior value, and it returns a true if they differ, otherwise it returns a false. And then one more thing that's even more is if you click this help on this function, that opens up a very large, very helpful, very deep page of Salesforce help about all these different functions and what they do and examples and all kinds of great stuff. So know about that, definitely click on it, take a look. But in this case, it's fairly simple. I'm using this isChanged, and the field that I'm evaluating first is the mailing street field. Then I close my parentheses, and I've got these two pipes. Well, what the heck does that mean? What that actually means is OR. And so some of you who've done formula fields, you're familiar with these. It's exactly the same syntax. So if you're not, I'm going to talk through it. So two pipes means OR. There's another way to do that that's a little bit more old school. So you may have seen OR, paren, and then some other things. But I think these two pipes are really, really easier to read. So what I'm saying here is basically if the mailing street field is changed, or the mailing city field is changed, or the mailing state field is changed, then this rule is going to evaluate to true, and that means this action is going to happen. And my action is very simply assign a task to the account owner, give it a subject line that needs to be edited because I typed badly, and then tell it when do you want to assign the due date for this task. And in my case, I'm assigning the rule trigger date, which is when that thing evaluated to be true, plus 7 days. I'm giving it a status of in progress, a priority of normal. I could put in some comments if I wanted to. Maybe please review the address changes to make sure they are correct, or something like that. Save. Oops. Apparently I already have been doing some testing. Okay, and there you go. The last thing, and probably the most important thing, is you have to activate the rule. Otherwise, nothing will happen. So I'm going to go ahead and click the activate button. And do you want me to go ahead and do a test, Caroline, or we want to move on?
I'll believe that that formula works. It's interesting. It's interesting you're using a formula because sometimes the criteria can be really simple on a workflow rule, couldn't it? It could even be that just like the record's been created. I mean, you may have certain things that happen just because the record's been created. And I'm just wondering, I wondered, there's some questions that John has been asking about opportunities and grants and talking about deadlines. And I don't know, Ashima, because you've been following the question, do you think that a kind of a workflow rule that generates a task like this would also help John with what he's asking about, because he's talking about reminders and deadlines.
It sounds like it, although I'm a bit perplexed on what his question is, so I probably would want to hear a little bit more from him. But yeah, because there's some functionality built in, but I'm not sure if he's saying that he wants to have. He's saying here, but we would like 2 users to be reminded once we decide to make a grant, we'd create an opportunity. So I'm not sure if you're it sounds like you're applying for a grant, but then you're making a grant. So I'm not sure which one it is. I guess I'm more perplexed. He's saying he doesn't have a speaker. I'm assuming he doesn't have a microphone.
Yeah. All right. So
I want to drill a little more, but I still think that is a good topic anyway, of just how to generate reminders, things to follow up on with dates.
So I think, if you don't mind, Michael, while you're there, it sounds to me like maybe you could create some task thing, like a task that maybe would happen on when an opportunity is created. Could you just show what the criteria might be for a created opportunity that's record type grant? Or I'm not sure whether you have grant record types in there, but if you have something similar.
Okay, sure. So in this case, you mentioned opportunity. So we have to choose opportunity as starting object. I click next, and I give it a name, new grant. I like to abbreviate eval true when a grant is. I love public typing.
I know, sorry, we're getting you on there.
Okay, so in this case, I think what I want to do is use this for just when it's created, you said?
Yeah, I think so, probably rather than when it's added.
Yeah, and then just the straight criteria, you can do some very useful things here. So you could just say, created date not equal to blank, because created date is assigned by Salesforce, the system, as soon as you create it. So as soon as you create a record, that's always going to be true. It's a very simple, that's how I usually do my created workflow rules. If anyone has another thought or idea, welcome to hear it, but this is the easiest, I think. And I click save.
The only other thing Michael, sorry, I was just going to say, the only other thing I'll do sometimes is to switch it to formula and then just write true. Like not even end quotes. Yeah, that's another easy way to make sure it always runs.
That's cool.
And the other thing I think we needed here was that specifically that it was a grant. Not just any opportunity.
I did skip that step. So let me go back in and edit my rule. And let's see what I have for record type. Opportunity record type equals, crossing fingers. Yay, we have grant. So that's a really nice, very wizardy, non-code looking way of writing your rule. And so now that my rule is correct, I'm going to add, what kind of actions do you think we want here, Caroline?
It sounded like a task or to a couple of specific users.
Okay, and is there any, so let's say assign to, maybe I'll assign one to myself, and I'll give it a subject of review, grant, and fill in fields, I don't know.
And Ashima, yes, carry on, Michael. And Ashima, I think this is will be to do with a change in the stage. So we'll come back to what John is saying in a moment. But carry on, Michael.
Okay. So I'm just going to have it be rule trigger date plus 0 days, so I get it as soon as that record is created. And you said you wanted another task, so I'll use that save and new button. So here's another task, and this one I'll assign to my friend and colleague, Margaret Fago, to do something else grant related. And this one, maybe I'll give her 3 days before she has to do that. Anything else here? No?
Sounds
okay.
good.
We'll go ahead and save that. We can always add more actions later if we need to. Okay. And if we wanted to do any time triggers, we could do that here. And how that works is if we want to wait some period of time before we do something else. We're kind of doing that here, but so maybe I'll just skip that for now. Call it done, activate, and away we go.
Great. That's great. That's a really good example. And, you know, I think some of these kind of things that just happen when records are created, often, you know, you can do all sorts of little updates, can't you, that happen in very simple rules like this. I mean, you can pre-fill information, and you can select certain values and things on records. Workflow rules like this can be really useful, can't they, for created or edited records?
They can, very. It's a great way to enforce data quality too, with field updates and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. So just before we move on, and this is great, we have a question that is it possible to make workflows dependent on a certain time, like sort of that they run weekly or monthly instead of a specific action taking place? That's a question from Norman. Anyone want to leap in on that one?
I'll take it if that's okay. I mean, that's often that's a key concept, and correct me if I'm wrong or if I'm not answering the question correctly, but a key concept about any of these automation tools is that they always require some action in order to be evaluated. There's not a magic something out there that's just looking at all the records in your database on a schedule to see if certain things meet criteria. Your records have to be edited in some respect in order for any of these things to be evaluated. If you need to do something on a more kind of scheduled batch, evaluate all these things every Wednesday night or whatever like that, then typically you need some sort of Apex work in that case. Anyone, if I'm wrong, feel free to jump in.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right, Michael, isn't it? And I think it's one of those things that often trips people up about workflow rules, that and process too. I mean, it really, as you say, there has to be some change to the record. Something has to be edited in order for these things to fire. And it's something you have to be quite careful about with reminders, isn't it?
Right. Now, I have seen examples, and we've actually done some with time-dependent workflow actions where we did one in one of our automation circles of success where it was basically a birthday reminder. And so when someone hit a birthday or had a birthday, we set a reminder for 11 months after that to tell someone, hey, they're about to have another birthday. And so you can kind of get what feels like it's evaluating every month or every day if someone has birthdays, but it's really, it's a little bit more complicated than that.
Yeah, I've done a similar thing with an expiration date on a membership, but it feels kind of strange because you're setting up the workflow basically a year before it expires, isn't it? And you're setting a reminder, right, which is like, send me a reminder 30 days before the expiration date, but actually the reminder is not going to come, as you say, for like 11 months. But that's where you have to set it up, is right at the beginning. And
yep.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's really useful. So I think, could you just click on the workflow actions on edit, just so that let's just quickly go through what are the types of actions you can do with a workflow rule, because I think that will then segue us very nicely into Jason being able to tell us about what you can do with Process Builder.
Yeah, great point. So we've done tasks already. New email alerts, these are very, very powerful and often used as well. The key thing with an email alert, and I'm just going to click this button one time to make the point, is you actually have to have an email template set up first before you can create an email alert. And so once again, you've got your rule, that's your criteria, you've got your action, which is the alert, and in the case of an email alert, you also need a third thing, which is the email template, which is what you're actually that's the message in the body of the email. So I'll just cancel on that, talk through the other items. Come on, internet. Okay. So field update, and this is just like it says. You get a list of fields from whatever object your rule is on, and you can set them to various defaults, or even in some cases you can have a formula, maybe if it's a text field. I often use that for setting record names on custom objects, so that the record name is, you know, Joe Schmo's whatever custom object record, rather than something 1, 2, 3, 4. The last item is a little bit complicated, and you won't see this used in simple orgs that don't have some sort of code going on. An outbound message is essentially a piece of code going to some external source so that that external source can do something. And then the last item is just an existing one of any of these. So you click that and you get to choose any of those items. And if you have any of these things selected, you can just move it over. So we've got some field updates set up already. So I could just add these here rather than recreating them. Good.
Fantastic. Yeah, that's really great, Michael. So we did have a question that from Claire R, who I think may be a little confused by the way I phrased it. We're talking about the birthday reminder, and she says, what's the reason you can't set up the alert a month before rather than 11 months after? And maybe that's confusing from what I said, though. Well, I think we better troubleshoot it between us, Michael. Certainly, yeah. You can have the reminder to fire 1 month before a date. It's just that if you're setting something up that spans over a year, the alert's not going to happen for 11 months. But I think you have to be a little more careful with birthdays, don't you?
You do, and I might even have an example here, a workflow example.
Because something like an expiration date, you can definitely do have this fire 30 days before, but birthdays are a little more complicated, aren't they?
Right. Well, yeah. First of all, I mean, so this is a little bit complicated, but the short version is that you have to have entered a birth date for the person, and remember that birth dates, like I was born November 22nd, 1969. Now you all know, but that was not last year, right? You know, so you have to actually set up a formula field for their next birth date that calculates, and that's where it gets kind of complicated. With an expiration date, that literally was last year, and you started your membership on January 1st of 2015, and January 1st of 2016 is coming up. Right, add a year to that to make it relevant. Birth dates, as you said, are interesting because none of us who are talking about this were born last year. I'm very confident of that. So you need to get a little more creative.
Absolutely. So I hope that helps, Claire, and that is the difference. It's between, yes, a sort of dates which you can do relative to a year, and as Michael says, birth dates. And yeah, you'd have to be a real child prodigy to be on this call, I think. You were only born last year. Okay, we'll just quickly look. There's a couple of questions from Norman. Anybody on the team? The first one was, will we be prompted if we set workflow rules which conflict with each other? That is, that they're referencing the same field to update in different ways. Would you get a prompt?
Nope.
Yeah, sadly, I'm afraid, Norman. That's you can. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say that's absolutely part of the part of setting up any of these automation tools that I didn't go over is you really need to think through your process and plan it out, and think that through in the context of any other processes that you already have in place, so that you don't have things doing things to each other and ending up in crazy circular situations. So that's on you to figure out.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we'll talk there are various questions coming in about naming and best practices. I think if you could hold those questions, we'll come back to them in a little bit, because I definitely wanted to get the team to share their best practice tips. One other quick question I think we can deal with from Norman. Are workflow rules that are part of managed packages, so managed workflow rules that are related to packages or apps that have been installed. Yes, if the package is removed, will those managed workflow rules go away?
They will.
Yeah.
Yes. Although, and if you click into them, you can see which package it is. And so in this case, oh my gosh, I'm not sure what that is, actually.
Old version of the nonprofit starter pack.
Which I probably should uninstall. Anyway, so yeah, those are absolutely, that's how that works, but you need to then understand, well, maybe I should deactivate their rule, and you can clone it and make your own version of it and do whatever you need it to do.
Great. Well, thank you. Those are great questions. Thank you. Thank you very much, Michael, for the for showing us that so far. So I will relieve you from presenter duties just for a moment and take this back myself, and maybe even show the slide that I had lovingly prepared. Let's do that. So there you go, everybody. You can see their wonderful faces and names from the panel. So let's move on and talk a bit about Process Builder, because Process Builder, yeah, I mean, workflow rules, that was what we had, and it was great and it was wonderful. And then I can't remember, is it about a year ago? We started to get all very excited about Process Builder. So Process Builder is quite similar, but there's more you can do. Jason, do you want to take us through a little bit about Process Builder and what it is and how it works?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. All right. Are you ready to be the presenter?
Yeah. I just have to make a guess about which screen I'm supposed to show. It's always tricky, isn't it?
All right. Okay.
What are we seeing right now?
We are seeing your screen, and we look like you're in a process.
I don't want to be in a process. I want the other screen. Hang on.
All right. Go for it.
Okay. Okay, now what are we seeing?
We are seeing, setup in your Salesforce instance.
Wonderful. Okay. So Process Builder is sort of just like a supercharged workflow. As far as I know, there's really nothing workflow can do that Process Builder can't also do. Am I forgetting something important? Or is that pretty much true?
I think outbound messages is the one thing.
Okay, yeah, outbound messages. Yeah, that's right. I rarely think about outbound messages, so yeah, sorry. So other than that, however, that doesn't mean that workflow rules are obsolete. The big advantage of workflow rules is that oftentimes they're just easier to set up and configure. So again, I'm fond of just searching for whatever you're looking for, in this case, Process Builder. But if you wanted to, you could go to Create, and then Process Builder is under Workflows and Approvals, same as Workflows. So when you click on Process Builder, you're going to be taken to a different screen. It looks almost nothing like Salesforce, which is probably kind of scary for you. But rest assured, once you get used to it, it's basically the same functionality, just in a more visual interface. And so 3 of the most interesting things that Process Builder can do that workflows cannot is, 1, if you have, for example, a household, you could set up a process that when you change a field on that household, it will change a field on all the contacts that are in that household. So with a single change, you can have it like propagate across all of the child objects of that relationship. Another feature is that you can update parent objects as well. And I can show you both of these in a moment. What that basically means is you can change a field on the contact and have it change a field on the household that you've specified via your process. And the third interesting component is that you can actually just simply create a record through Process Builder, like any standard record, a contact, an account. It could be a custom object that you've created. So you can create pretty much any type of object. It can be related to the object you're building, but I believe it does not have to be. The example I've set up, it is going to be related. So maybe really quick, I'll just so you can see a couple of these things in action. I've created a household of me and my siblings here. And the first thing I want to show you is if we wanted to create a new contact, and this isn't a use case that you're likely ever going to need. It's pretty specific where you just want to check a box and have some contact created, but it'll show you how this works. So if I just check this create sample contact box and save, it's going to think about it for a while, and then it's going to reload, and you can see all of a sudden sample contact has been added to our list of contacts. So that's an example of Process Builder just creating a record for you via a process I've set up. And then really quick, let's go to another tab. And let's say you want to update something on the contact and you want that to also be updated immediately on the household. So in this case, I'm just using a plain text field. And we'll go ahead and save that. And assuming I didn't disable this one, we should see, as soon as that's loaded, the field contact text here. You can see it copy that text exactly. And one thing to know about this is going to be true for everyone related to that household. So if I come over here to Rachel and I say, no, this is my text because we're in a fight, then you see right away it's been overwritten. No, this is my text. And I also haven't specified that, don't overwrite with blank. So, and we don't need to see that, but if I went to my brother here and just like saved with blank text, it would actually replace this with blank. And that's all stuff you can control through your Process Builder setup. And so now I want to show you what Process Builder actually looks like. So instead of any of these, I'm going to create a new process that will update all the contacts when we update the field on the household. So you click new. First thing you're going to do is give your name and your description. And let's call this update contact active status. Because I created a checkbox that I just called active. I know it's boring, but it'll work for this example.
I think this could also be very useful actually for inactivity, couldn't it? Particularly if you had somebody, if the members of the household were deceased, for example, and you wanted to make it inactive, this sounds like it would be really useful to make it work that way too.
Absolutely, yeah, 100%. So this is what Process Builder looks like. Sorry, I just jumped right into it. Again, it's essentially the same setup as workflow. It's just confusing because it's all this like visual, like kind of flow chart looking arrangement. So same with workflows. The first thing we do is choose the type of object. In this case, we're using the household account model. So we want accounts as opposed to the household custom object. And you can choose if this should only run when the account is created, or if it's when it's created or edited, so basically all the time. And we don't need to worry about recursion in the advanced. That's more than I think we want to get into right now. But for our purposes, since my household already exists, we want this to run when it's created or edited. So let's save that. We've now saved the account object, and we're saying run when created or edited. Our next step is to add criteria, and let me move the GoToMeeting thing because it's getting all in my way. And we name our criteria. So this is the same as your workflow rule that you were giving a name. So we can name this, it can be the same as the process. You can name it something else. If you have multiple criteria, then you can set up different names for each of them. In this case, let's say only update when active is changed, because I want it to work both ways. If active is switched on or off, I want this to run. And if you recall from the workflow example, we were coming up with creative ways to make sure the workflow always runs. One of those was just to say when creative date not equal to blank. Process Builder is nice because I can just check a box and just say, no criteria, just execute the action. So we don't have to worry about that. When I check this, it's just always going to go. So you don't have to like kind of spoof the system into constantly running. In my case, though, what I want is a formula, and I lost my cursor. There it is. So what I want to say is basically same thing Michael was using, is if it is changed. So we just choose is changed, and our field is going to be the field I've created. So when you click field, it kind of pops up this really complicated looking list of fields and a tree. And what's interesting about this is it doesn't have to be a field just on the account. It could be a field on, you know, something the account looks up to. So this is sort of a dev org I use. There's a lot of different lookups, but like primary contact is one that you would expect to see. So I could choose a field on primary contact if I wanted to. So I could say if the primary contact of this account is, I don't know, like maybe their name is changed, then we want to perform an update on all the contacts related to the account. And I've gotten myself stuck, so I have to cancel this because we don't want to actually use the accounts or the contact. We just want to use the field I've created called active. So as you can see, you can just type and search for it. You just click on it, you choose your field. And so now what I'm saying is if this field active is changed, then we're going to run this rule that I'm about to create. There is an advanced setting where you can specify that you want to execute the actions only when the changes are made. So it's similar to the workflow rule, and I can't remember the exact wording of that, but basically what you're saying is the same thing I've created here with is changed. So we don't need to worry about that. We go ahead and save this.
You know, that finding fields thing, that finding fields thing confused me, confused the heck out of me when I first started using Process Builder. You know how, because like you just did, like you go across account and across object and everything else. And I was going, where are just the fields on this object? It's a confusing one, isn't it? Takes some getting used to.
It definitely is. So actually, let's point that out really quick. So when you're looking for a field, you're going to see duplicates of a lot of these. So like if I search contact test, which is a lookup I created, I don't remember why. So it has an arrow next to it, which means basically you're not choosing this, you're just going one step further. So you can see it brings me to the next one. So if you actually want to choose a field, you need to make sure it doesn't have one of those arrows next to it so that you're operating on that field instead of just saying, keep going down the line, I'm looking for a different field. So hopefully that clarifies that a little bit, but it is still confusing, really. It's just, you kind of got to get in there and play with it and get used to that functionality. So now I've clicked add action because we want to add an action. And as you can see, there are a bunch of different actions here that aren't available via workflow. There's Apex, there's create a record, there's flows, there's quick actions, so all sorts of interesting stuff. In our case, what we want to do is update records because if you recall, before I started this long rant, our objective was to check the active box on the accounts and have it check all the contacts. So we're going to choose update records. And we have to name this as well. Process Builder loves making you name everything. Okay. And select a record to update. So this immediately is a little bit confusing. You click on it, and even the wording is a little bit confusing. Select a record to update. Like, what does that mean? What if I just want to update this record? You know, like you check a box on account, and then maybe some pick list value gets set automatically. So if that's the case, you would just say select the account record that started your process. I could click this, and what would immediately happen is it would bring me to that same list of fields that we saw a moment ago, where I would just then choose the field that I want to update, and we would specify what value it gets updated with. But we actually want to update related records. So we click this one. And when we do that, we see immediately this list of, again, a bunch of fields and stuff. So from here, you can actually update two types of relationships. You could update a relation or an object that you're looking up to. So again, like if I wanted to update something on the primary contact, I could do that. But if instead I want to update all the related contacts, I can just type contacts, and I can find the relationship name of that field. You click on it, and what's going to happen now is this knows to just update that field for all the contacts that are related to this account via the standard account lookup. So then I choose this, and you can even specify criteria so that you can selectively have some of your records update and some not. So if my criteria was maybe the record has been modified in the last month, then perhaps my brother and I would both meet that criteria, but my sister would not. So that would mean that she would not get her active box checked, but the other of us would. For now, we're not going to specify criteria. We just want to say, update all the records. Don't think too much about it. So the field we want to check, I've called it household active. You can see I just typed to search for it. There's also a drop down if you want to, look through the list. And you can specify an exact value. So you could say always true or always false. You could create a complicated formula to say, if I do this on Monday, it's true, or whatever. It's a formula. But what we want is just a reference. And a reference just means basically look at some other field and just take the value of that field. So I chose reference. You can see the value changes from formula or Boolean to find a field. And when I click on this, we get our field pop up again. And once again, if it has an arrow, we could keep going down the list, and we could, search for a field like 5 objects down. But we're going to keep it simple. We're just going to search for active. We're going to choose active. So now when active is changed, we're saying change household active on all of the related contacts. We'll save this, and same as with workflows, you're not done yet. You're not done until you come up here into the corner and click activate. So let's go ahead and activate this and give it a try. And it gives you a little warning. Process Builder has sort of a version control, and only one version can be active at a time. What that means is basically just what it sounds like. So you can't modify these once they're saved. You have to create a new version, and by activating the most recent version, it'll deactivate all or any other previous versions that might be active. In our case, we only have one version, so this warning means nothing to us. We go ahead and confirm. This is now active. You can see it says it's read-only now because I've activated it. So we'd have to clone it and create a new version if we want to make changes. But we don't care about that right now. I've gone back to our household. I want to check the active box. I was testing on this earlier though, so let me make sure, okay. Inactive there. So now let's go ahead and save active on the household. It's saving, it's thinking about it. And let's see if we set this up correctly. Okay, that's now checked. Same for Rachel. And same for Robert. So there you go. You can see with Process Builder, you can update related objects, you can update many objects, you can control which of those many objects get updated and which don't, and you can also even create records. There's much more you can do with it, but these are some of the core essentials that can really get you moving along. And That's pretty much everything I got for Process Builder.
Well, that's great. No, that's very nice. Let's just talk a little bit quickly about those actions. I mean, just to the others, what are some of the other things that maybe you do with Process Builder that you couldn't do with a workflow rule? I think, Michael, you use it to create chatter posts, don't you?
Yeah, I love that. It's a great way to drive adoption of chatter, first of all, if you're trying to do that. But it's also a really nice way to sort of take the concept of notifying someone or a group of people about something happening. But if you do it in chatter, then you sort of promote that collaborative aspect of chatter that you can have on a record, and it's all visible on the record as opposed to in an email thread outside of your system.
Yeah, that's a great one. The other one I like is that you can actually, on an opportunity, you can actually update the campaign via process, which I think I'm right in saying in a workflow rule you can't do. You can't set the primary campaign source on an opportunity, but you can do it with a process. So I've used that. I like that. I think one of the others.
Very good use, yeah.
Yeah, it is, isn't it? And I think the other thing, I mean, you were just having one set of criteria, but have any of you used a process where it goes through sort of multiple criteria? So there's a series of, it's like almost like combining a bunch of workflow rules into one process. Anyone got an example?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I have several workflow rules that set the opportunity owner based on the account owner for our gift officers and various other advancement staff. And I haven't yet taken the time to rebuild that as a single process, but that's absolutely on my to-do list because it's a lot easier to manage from one place instead of going into 7 different workflow rules or whatever.
Yeah, the only thing you have to be a little careful is the first time I tried doing that is I set up my criteria such that it stopped after the first process because I was like going, oh, it'll change this and it changes that, and of course it evaluated it on the first stage of the process and then it had sort of met the criteria and that was that. But definitely this, I think this range of actions is one of the great reasons why you might use Process Builder over workflow rules. Do any of you have any other suggestions? And this comes back to one of the questions that we had, or one of the comments anyway, saying they thought that one of the main benefits of Process Builder over workflow seems that there seem to be many more action types available. Anything else you'd say that is a benefit of Process Builder, or maybe not a benefit? What do you sort of think about when you choose between one or the other?
For me, if it's something that I can do quickly and I know workflows are going to work, I usually always default to workflow. I just find they're a little bit faster to set up, especially if I need to create several of them that are very similar. I don't know, that might just be me, but sometimes the Process Builder interface, it moves a little slow for me, and it's just easier, I think, to work with workflows occasionally.
I would agree, especially if all you want your workflow to do is assign a task, because with Process Builder, you have to assign many more attributes of the task. It's not sort of an action unto itself. It's just create a record from tasks, and you have to, the way that you do that is a little bit more involved than it is with workflow. I'm just going to throw in the chat here a really great Trailhead module on choosing process automation tools. That I think is a really fantastic starting place if you're just getting into this. And the following modules that come after this go through each of them and help you actually log into a developer org and set one up. So that's a really great resource.
What about the actual building of them? I mean, they are a little more complex. Are there things that you need to be careful about building workflow rules versus Process Builder? You mentioned the versioning, Jason, and I know that that's both an advantage and a disadvantage. I mean, it's harder, isn't it, to make quick changes. You know, with a workflow rule, you can just keep editing it and tweaking it kind of really easily until you get it to work. Process Builder is a little more involved. Is there anything else that one should kind of be careful of when you're doing either of them? And what about testing them?
Go ahead, Jason.
I don't know. I'm trying to think of other examples. I mean, you're right about the versioning, though. That's a great point, because it can be frustrating if you're not exactly sure how do you need to configure it. I've had examples where I've gone through 10 versions of what seemed like a simple process, just trying to get it right. Whereas with workflows, you could just click edit, make your change, and then save it. So,
right.
Other than that,
the other,
I'm trying to think other,
Well, one other thing that I discovered fairly recently with the criteria in Process Builder is it actually evaluates those in the order in which you define them. So we ran into, I can't come up with a specific example. I'm not sure that workflow works the same way. I think especially if you use a formula, it just evaluates that whole formula all at once. Whereas if you use the criteria in Process Builder, and this may be true of using the criteria in workflow rules, I honestly haven't tested that, it evaluates those criteria in order. And there was a reason why that was a problem in a specific instance, but it's a good consideration. The other thought I had around testing is, first of all, testing in a sandbox first, especially with Process Builder, but really with any of these, is if you're in a production environment where people are actively using your org, it's just best practice to do that. One, you won't confuse people with things happening that they didn't expect to happen, and that's probably the biggest thing. And two, you really want to have your own sense of confidence that this thing is going to do what you want when you put it in a production instance. You develop a sense of, hey, isn't that person great at figuring stuff out, as opposed to how come this guy's always breaking stuff? And a further thought is,
you wouldn't break things, surely, Michael.
Well, no, seriously. When I was first getting started with this, I was nervous about it. And so what I would do, even when I would put it in production, is I would have whatever it was, the workflow rule was all we had then, only applied to me. So I'd add a criteria that says end user last name equals Slawnik. So I could do testing in production on a test record or something, but not have it accidentally fire something off because I just didn't really understand it yet. But that was it's a nice little tip.
Oh yeah, I've done that one too. That's great. And we have a question about, we've had a couple of questions about documenting these things and about naming conventions and that kind of thing. Ashima, you're always good at documentation. Are you, can you take yourself off mute? Do you have any recommendations or best practices about how you would document your workflow rules and Process Builder?
Yes, actually, Beth Howard and I have been having a little private conversation about, and I hope, I don't know if she minds, but I really would like to share her flow that she created. Can I do that?
Sure.
This is what I think people need to do, and you all are going to hate it, but it's so important. So, okay, how do I do this?
So do you want, have you got the flow, or do we need to make Laurel the presenter?
I've got it. She shared it with me. I can show it.
All right, okay.
Beth, I hope you don't mind, but I'm going to share it. So this is what I highly recommend. Okay, why are you not showing?
Yeah, go ahead. Oh, I can see it.
We can see it.
Okay, so you can. Okay. Well,
yeah.
This doesn't look any different to me. Okay, so you're seeing this Process Builder email opt-in out system, right? So Beth created this lovely flow chart that you may not all understand right now, but we can talk to you later. Really, that documents out her criteria, so her conditions are here. It makes it really easy for someone to say, oh, she has an opt-in box on her contact and an opt-out email box on her contact, and she's going to execute some actions, and here are the actions she's going to execute. She's going to execute some actions in this case, and here are those actions she's going to execute, and she's wondering why things aren't working, and we have been chatting about it. But this is huge. Like, giving this to somebody and saying, this is what my flow is doing, and I don't understand why, and here's what's happening, allows a conversation to unfold. And it also is great documentation for you in the future when you go back to it and you're like, what the hell was I thinking? And this will give you that sort of overriding view. Some people like doing flowcharts. Other people prefer to do like outline almost. If I find one, I'll share it with you all, because I've written a few. But something like this really helps you in the future, somebody else coming down the road looking at it, or like if you were to post this on the hub, you know, you'd have a group of people going, ooh, okay, now I understand what you're doing. Let me make sure. Let me ask some clarifying questions and drill further. So I recommend this. Does that help, Caroline?
Yeah. Well, and I think that's a great troubleshooting tool, isn't it? Because if something's not working, you can kind of go back and look at how you planned it and try and figure out. I've suddenly looked at the clock and realized this hour has sped by so fast. So yes, absolutely. So, which is absolutely great. So since we have kind of a minute per panel member, either tell me, where would you go, each of you, where would you go? Where's your favorite place to learn more about this? Or what's one tip that that maybe we haven't shared? Michael, I'll let you kick off. Where would you go to learn more? Sure. Or is there something that you wanted? Yeah, okay. And
yeah, I mean, I know I already said that, but I can't emphasize strongly enough how awesome a tool that is. That thing came out, what, a year ago? Not even. And if I had that when I was first learning about Salesforce in 2009, 2010, 2011, 2012, I mean, it's just an amazing resource and so easy to really get your hands into using it. So I really can't recommend it highly enough. As far as a tip, the only other thing, and I hope this isn't too complicated, but for those of you who have gotten some familiarity with using formula fields or building formula fields on your objects, you know, custom field that maybe calculate something against something else or that kind of thing. Those are great. We all love them. They're fantastic for reporting and putting on page layouts. Just know that you cannot trigger any of these automation tools off of a formula field alone. They aren't considered record updates. They're considered sort of in real-time evaluation. So that may be a little bit too geeky, but I did want to mention that in case anyone was thinking, oh, I can use a formula field to be the evaluation of my criteria. So
yeah, no, it's good. It's a good point, and it's well worth going to do some research if you didn't quite understand what Michael said. Jason, how's your favorite way of learning more about this, or do you have a tip that you wanted to share?
So it may seem kind of a cop-out, but I have to say, when I need to know more, I go to the hub. In my personal experience...
No, you're allowed to mention the hub. That's great.
Okay, perfect. In my personal experience, whatever issue you're having, someone somewhere has already had that issue. And usually it's documented on the internet somewhere. So why not start by just reaching out to people? That's the way I think about it, and usually that works pretty well for me.
What a great piece of advice. And Ashima, where's your favorite place to learn, or how your favorite way to learn?
I like to learn by doing. So I definitely get into an org and just muck around. Obviously not a production like a sandbox or a developer org. And I'm much more in the mindset of playing. And normally when I play is when I run into those like, why is it doing this? And I always start with a flow chart. Even if that flow chart is something that will not be what the end product is, I always start there because it helps me to just coalesce my thoughts.
Fantastic. That's great. And I think, yes, absolutely. And I know, Ashima, having worked with you on slightly more complex things where it gets into visual workflow and some of the sort of more sophisticated tools, having those flowcharts, they're so important, because the more complex the process gets, the more you really need to plan and think it out in advance. So that's great.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, there we go. Thank you very much, everybody, for this hour that has sped by. I am still here. My computer is still recording, so hopefully that means that we will have something that we can post to you all in the hub. Thank you very much for the great questions. Thank you to our panel for the fantastic demos. And let's please keep this conversation going, and we'll see you all in the hub.